Okay, so welcome everyone. Tonight we are going to discuss a very interesting uh, portion of Bible of Torah, and it's Lot and his daughters. And I'm always tempted to actually maybe read the. I think I'm going to do this. It's Genesis 19 for those of you who always have a Bible handy. Um, but what I think I'll probably do is I'll put it up on Safaria. And so, we can sort of I think this is going to be a fun way to do this. Um, that we'll actually read the story in pretty standard translation and actually get through the whole story. It's a long chapter in the book of Genesis. Um, and then what I think this is it's an excellent example of midrash, of digging into a story. Um, and what we're going to see in this article that I distributed, some classic midrash and what the rabbis, 1,000 years ago had to say about this story. But also, what is particularly interesting is a modern midrash, and I would say even a feminist midrash on, you know, on focusing on the daughters rather than on Lot. Uh, Bless you,
Oh, shoot.
Ken and Patricia.
Uh, Rabbi, did you want to say the blessing before we get?
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, our blessing. Baruch atah
Baruch atah
Adonai
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Eloheinu melech
haolam
haolam,
asher
asher
kidshanu
kiddushanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asot
b'divrei
b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
The
So,
story of it starts.
so again, just to review the story, Lot is Abraham's nephew. So he is a relative. He's certainly not a child of Abraham. Um, and he is I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's living in Sodom, and in the Genesis 18, we've had God speaking to Abraham and saying, the outcry of 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 the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah has come to me, and I'm going to destroy the cities. And actually, God says to God's self, shouldn't I share this with my guy Abraham? So God has, you know, I think Abraham is now Abraham, yes, not Avram. So God has entered into the covenant with Abraham, and Abraham enters into this negotiation with God uh, that basically begins. Again, I love the concept of arguing with God, and even arguing and winning when you argue with God. And Abraham says to God, shall not the God of justice do justly? And he says, suppose we can find 50 righteous people in the cities. Will you spare the entire city for the sake of 50? Which is sometimes it's missed. It's not, Abraham is not asking God just to spare those 50, but to spare the entire city for the sake of the 50. And then there's a negotiation, and God says, okay. And then it goes to 40, 30, 20, and 10. And Abraham, doesn't try and go any further than 10. And it's one of the sources for 10 people being in a minyan, that you shouldn't be in a community that doesn't have 10 righteous people. Stephen.
Okay, two things I don't understand. One is if there are no righteous people in the city, or almost none, who is it who's crying out? Whose cry
Yeah,
is it
let me,
that
let
is
me, just try. Actually, since I have this, whoops, there's Sarah. Actually, it says the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great. Let me back it up again. So we have some agents or people, which are also angels, visiting Abraham and Sarah, and they announce that Sarah will give birth at age 90 to a child, Isaac, and then Abraham is told. Well, actually, Abraham is told by God. Um, and let me go to screen share so you can see what I'm reading. This is Safaria. Let me get you back so I can see you guys also. Okay, so Adonai says, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and the sin is so grave, and I'll go down and see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. So, you can have rotten people crying out, right? I mean, that's the interesting question is, what were the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah? And we're going to see the reason why we have a phrase sodomy, which is often understood to be male homosexual anal intercourse. But in fact, the prophets and the midrash say that the sin of Sodom was inhospitality in the extreme to visitors and sort of the underclass. And there's some interesting examples of that. But so the agents, let's see. So Abraham remains standing before God, and the agents go down to Sodom, and then we have this negotiation from 50 to 40, and see, we get down to what if 10 will be found there? I will not destroy for the take of 10, and then God departed, and Abraham returned to his place. So I am gonna. Did you have something else you wanted to add,
The
Stephen?
other thing, and I've mentioned this to you before, so don't belabor it because I think everybody here may have heard this already. I don't understand Abraham stopping at 10. He puts in all this effort to argue with God and do this 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 routine. And it's all wasted because he ends that because he stops there. If he continued up, if he kept going a little bit farther to 4 or 3, then even if it's just Lot and his family, God that's enough people, and the city is spared. But he does because he ends at 5 rather than doing 1 or 2. I'm sorry, at 10 rather than continuing on to 3 or 4. He's wasted all of that.
Yeah, so I think it's a reasonable question. I think ultimately, we have these salt flats in this area, and we have the Ammonites and the Moabites, which are enemies of Israel, and this is a story explaining it. So, I mean, if I were a Chabad Orthodox rabbi studying it, it might be an interesting question to pursue, but ultimately the story has to play itself out. And if Abraham had gotten God down to 1 or 2, then he wouldn't have destroyed the city, and there'd be nothing to talk about. And that's as honest an answer as I can give you.
So that's the in-universe explanation for
what?
You know how people who write about why things happen in TV shows, there's the in-universe explanation, the real explanation, where there's what was going on behind the scenes of like one of the actors didn't renew their contract, and then there's the in-universe explanation of how they wrote it in to have the character disappear either by death or changing plots or whatever.
And I would sometimes describe discussions like this as a pious explanation where I take the Torah literally and I accept and operate from the assumption that these things really happen the way the Bible described them. That's right. One universe of thought. And another universe of thought is I'm studying this from a scholarly perspective that I don't believe for a minute that these things actually happened. And then the question is, what's going on in the Bible? How did this story shape our perceptions? What was the point of including the story in the Bible? As I often say, and I actually read an article again recently on this, that if you actually look for archaeological evidence of things happening in the Bible, that evidence starts to appear around the time of David and Solomon. So, which is, not in the Torah. I mean, it's way past the Torah. We're talking about the book of Samuel and the book of Kings. So there's no archaeological evidence for any of this stuff. And what I would say, and I love this phrase, that these are our foundational myths. And by using the term foundational myth, I'm not suggesting that they're not true, but they are our foundational stories and are incredibly important as such. And their historicity or their truth is a separate, interesting question. But certainly there's no, archaeological evidence for any of this stuff, except, as I'll show you, there are some salt pillars in this area, and one of them looked like a woman, and we're going to say that was Mrs. Lot. Okay, so I think I'm going to read the text because I want to go through it somewhat quickly. So those messengers who had been visiting with Abraham go to Sodom, and Lot was sitting in the gate, and Lot is a very hospitable person, typical actually in Arab lands, and rises to greet them and bows. And then he says, please, my lords. And actually, interestingly, I'd love to point this out just to annoy people. The plural word for my lords is Adonai. If my lord singular would be Adoni. And so the word Adonai, which we often use for God, is actually a plural word. So struggle with that one for a while. So please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house, spend the night, bathe your feet, and then you can be on your way early. And they said, no, we'll camp out in the square. But he urged them strongly. And so they entered his house, and they had some stuff to eat. And they had not yet laid down when the town council and the militia of Sodom, I always like to click on this, Hebrew ba'anshe ha'ir ba'anshe Sodom, the townspeople, the men of Sodom, insignificant and influential alike, the whole assembly, without exception, gathered about the house. So we have a crowd. And they shouted to Lot, and they said to him, where are the ones who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may be intimate with them. And the Hebrew is v'nedah otam. So you have this word, which is actually it's in a passive verb form, but it comes from this concept of biblical knowing. He knew his wife, which is understood to have sexual connotations. So Lot went out to them in the entrance. So Lot goes outside to talk to these men. And he says, I beg you, my friends, don't commit such a wrong. And he says, look, I have 2 daughters. Let's just see what the asterisks are. Daughters I of great value to Lot, who have not known a man, namely virgins. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you please. I will entrust them to you as hostages if you will trust me, meanwhile, with the visitors. I don't know where they're getting that, but do not do anything to the others, since they have come under the shelter of my roof. So, as you can imagine, the feminists are not going to be impressed with Lot at this point in time. So the townspeople basically want to rape the men, and Lot says, don't do this. In effect, they are under my protection as visitors. If you have to rape something, I'll give you my 2 young daughters. And they said, so the group says, stand back. That fellow came here as an alien, and already he acts as a ruler, namely they're talking about Lot. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. And they press hard against the householder, against Lot, and moved down to break the door. But the agents stretched out their arm. Agents. Let's say agents. Okay, see the other notes. Yeah, it's anashim, so it's the men. But we understand that these men are actually angels in addition to being men. Stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, low and high, they struck with a blinding light, so they were helpless. So we know these are not ordinary men. I'm always sort of interested. I shouldn't belabor the asterisks. So the people that were gathering are struck blind, presumably through the agency of these men. And the agents said to Lot, whom else do you have here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, anyone else you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy the place, because the outcry against them has come before Adonai, and has been so great that Adonai has sent us to destroy it. Lois, I don't know if you're raising your hand or you're just...
No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
sorry,
no
I'm just listening.
Okay. So dawn breaks, and they urge Lot on. take your wife and your two remaining daughters. Oh, sorry, I missed a very important text. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters. Up, get out of this place, for Adonai is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests. Kim tzachek, which can mean laughter. Basically, the sons-in-law don't take Lot seriously. And so these guys now, the angels, I'll just call them messengers. The Hebrew word for messenger is the same as the Hebrew word for angel. Let's see. Yeah, it's hamalachim. So we know malach is an angel. The angels urge Lot on, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city. Yeah, Leslie.
So there's several daughters that he has, right?
Yeah, apparently he has several daughters, some of whom are married and some of whom are not married.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
We're
Go ahead.
assuming that the ones who have not known a man are not married, because
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Because he talks about his sons-in-law.
Right.
Okay. Still he delayed. This is Lot. So I'll just call them angels. So the angel seized his hand in the hands of his wife and his two daughters, in Adonai's mercy on him, namely Lot, brought him and left him outside the city. When they brought him outside, one said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away. So the angel gives this command, don't turn around and look. But Lot is arguing. He says, oh no, my Lord, you've been so gracious to your servant, and you've already shown me so much kindness to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and die. So he's reluctant to flee. Maybe it's too far, it's too arduous. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to, such a little place. Let me flee there. It's such a little place, and let my life be saved. And he replied, presumably one of the angels, very well, I will grant you this favor too. I will not annihilate that town of which you have spoken. And that town is called Zohar. So apparently Lot argues with the angels or begs for mercy from the angels and says, I can't really go all the way into the hills, but there's a little town. And the angels say, okay, we'll spare that town and you can go there. And he says, hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Hence the town is called Zohar. Let's see. It's connected with Misar, a little place. Okay. The sun rose on the earth and Lot enters the town. And Adonai rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from Adonai out of heaven, annihilating the cities and the plain and all the inhabitants. And Lot's wife looked backward, and thereupon she turned into a pillar of salt. And just in case you're wondering what pillar of salt looks like, can you see this? I presume you can.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. There's Lot's wife. This actually is called Lot's wife on the banks of the Dead Sea. And the next morning, Abraham hurried to the place, and he sees what's going on. And that's where God destroyed the plain and so on. So Lot went up from Zohar and settled in the hill country with his two daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zohar, and he and his two daughters lived in a cave. So this is actually going to be interesting in the article. Lot didn't want to go in the hills. He wanted to go in the town. So just the chronology here is Lot with his daughters go to some town, and then apparently he was afraid to stay there. We don't actually know why, although this author of the article is going to speculate on why. And so they go to live in a cave. And we don't know the names of the daughters, although in this modern midrash, the scholar writing the article is going to name them. The older one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. So again, the simple pshat is, the simple meaning of the text is the daughters at least are saying that there's the there's not a man on earth to consort with us, and so that we can have children. And one of the inconsistencies that the author of the article we're going to read points out is they've been in this little town called Zohar. So presumably there were men in that town. Now maybe that town was destroyed. We don't know. And so they're going to say, let's basically have children with our father. And that night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with the father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. And I'm just going to point out, I think there's a way, isn't there a way I can zoom in? I can't remember how I did it. Oh, well, I think I can, no, it's not a touch screen. Okay, there was a way, I know I did it once before. Reload, save those. Yeah. No, okay. So anyway, there's a little, I'm going to close this. There's a little dot above when she rose. It's over there, and that's going to, the authors of the midrash are going to focus on that dot, which apparently the Masoretes added. So the next day, the older one said to the younger, see, I lay with father last night. Let's make him drink wine tonight also. And you go in and lie with him that we may maintain life through our father. That night, they also made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down. Namely, he was presumably blackout drunk. And the two daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. And the older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today. And Moab means from dad. Av means father. And the prefix mem means from. And the younger one bore a son, and she called him Ben Ami. And he's the father of the Ammonites. Ben Ami means son of my people. Okay, so that's the basic story. Any questions on the basic story?
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But first, are there any children here? Because these are sort of adult questions. Are there
No,
any children?
no. Yeah, I can't guarantee. Now, actually, when I publish videos, they specifically ask, is this made for children? And I always answer no.
Okay.
But yeah, there are clearly adult questions here. Yes.
But first, the two daughters involved, these are the two daughters who had not known men, not the married daughters, right?
Correct.
Okay. How is it that they know what to do, know how reproduction works, since they have no experience and the guy is unconscious and or at least drunk enough not to know what's going on?
Well, in terms of how the daughters know, somehow our population has managed to survive since ancient times, and many mammals seem to be reproducing without explicit guidelines.
Yes, but generally not without the male being unaware of what's happening.
Yes. So actually, I think to me, the more realistic question is it likely that a male could engage in intercourse if he is blackout drunk? And I'll actually refer that one to Cheryl, who is shaking her head as a psychologist. And Les, you're a veterinarian, so I'm not sure your opinion how applicable. But you're
not too many dogs get their male partners drunk and then try to have sex. So
and actually, most mammals actually have a penis bone, a baculum, which is a whole other very interesting. Including
a dog does have a bone. It's called the penis.
Yes,
and it is a bone.
And in general, extreme intoxication is usually associated with problems in getting an erection.
Right.
Yes.
I have had reports from many patients that they wonder whether they need Viagra or something because they're not able to get erections, and it comes from chronic intoxication.
Okay. Yeah. So
I find, again, these stories are just like, of such disbelief. Do you really believe that you could put an animal skin on your arms?
Yeah. So basically, these stories.
Here's another one. let's go trick our father, and all these dysfunctional families of tricking. Let's give Leia instead of the
Right,
correct
right.
bride, and we'll put a veil. And he didn't know.
Now you know where the anti-Semitic people get their ideas about Jews being tricksters.
So what I would say what these stories scream is darsheni, drashmi, because on the surface there are huge problems with the stories, and so the midrashists, the rabbis of midrash, are going to leap into these issues and figure out how to explain them. If you study Chumash with Rashi, if you study the Torah with Rashi, the question everyone asks, the standard question when you read Rashi's commentary, Rashi is an 11th century rabbi, the commentator extraordinaire on lots of things, certainly Bible. The question you always find is the question, what's bothering Rashi? So there's clearly an issue in the text that's bothering Rashi. So Rashi and the rabbis are going to figure out, how do we understand the text given this problem? And this, you will be interested to know, is exactly what the article we're going to read will do, but it's going to do it from the daughter's perspective, which is really interesting. And it's also going to cast Lot in even a worse light than he already exists. Jim.
I have so many questions, but just a couple. You were told don't look back, but let's not forget the booze. They brought enough booze into the caves so that he could drink twice. That seems a little convenient.
Yeah, it turned out in Zohar, in the city of Zohar, there was a bevmo. No, it's a great question. Yeah. Take plenty to drink, but don't look back. Yeah,
but didn't they do that? They went out of town and then went to Zoab, so they didn't look back. His wife did, but they're in Zoab for a while, aren't they?
Yeah, they were in Zohar for some period of time. We don't know how long.
And then they went to the cave, correct?
So they could have gotten the booze in Zohar. So we can ask the question, what's bothering Rashi, and also what's bothering Jim, which is, where did the booze come from?
I don't think it was go quickly and don't look back. I think it was don't look back because you're not allowed to see it. It's like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where if you see God, you
yeah. So yeah, and this article we're going to read, which I'm certain we won't get through tonight, it's a long article, will actually addresses that. Why were they told not to look back, and why did Mrs. Lot look back? Okay, so now we're going to look at there is a website, and if you subscribe to the website, I think you get at least 2 emails a week from them. One is always on the Torah portion of the week, and the other is on just lots of interesting things that arise from the Torah portion. So this is Lot sexually manipulates his 2 daughters, which is certainly a different take on what we usually see here. After escaping Sodom, Lot and his daughters hide out in a cave, believing they were the last humans on earth. The daughters get their father drunk and conceive children with him while he is asleep. But since when do daughters rape their fathers? A womanist midrashic reading retells the story from their perspective. And before we get into it, I'm going to jump down to the very bottom of the article, so you can see a little bit about the Professor Reverend Will Gavney is the Right Reverend Samuel B. Husley Professor of Hebrew Bible at Bright Divinity School, Fort Worth, Texas. She holds a PhD in Hebrew Bible from Duke University and is an ordained Episcopal priest. She is a womanist Bible scholar and the author of A Woman's Lectionary for the Whole Church, and Womanist Midrash, a reintroduction of women of the Torah and of the throne. I'm not sure what that means, the throne. And commentaries on Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, the daughters of Miriam, women prophets, and so on. One interesting word here is womanist, as distinguished from feminist. And as you will see in the article, this author uses womanists to specifically present perspectives from the point of view of women of color rather than women generally. Although I have to say, in my reading of the article, I don't see where that makes a difference. But clearly that's something that's important to her. Okay, so now we're ready to read the article. So Joanne has been reading all along. I'll ask if there's anyone else who would like to read the article. If there is none, I will prevail on Joanne again. Joanne, you do such a great job, and you really do a great job. A lot of these words are not so easy.
Thank you.
There's a great word here which I've never seen before.
Thank you. I try.
Which we're going to see. We're going to see.
But thanks for your help sometimes as well.
No.
So,
Yeah.
all right. At the end of the account of the destruction of Sodom, the Torah tells a disturbing story about Lot fathering Moab and Ammon with his 2 unnamed daughters in a cave. The story is usually referred to as Lot and his daughters, or some such locution that emphasizes Lot's place as the protagonist of the biblical story. The story can also be read as a sister's story, but to do that requires an unwieldy title, such as 2 unnamed sisters and their father Lot. But this more appropriate name highlights how these 2 sisters have been submerged below the gaze of most readers.
And I would say generally, Torah texts and biblical texts are written from a man's point of view. These are there certainly is discrimination against the role of women in these texts. Okay.
Moab at Moab and Ammon. Moab and Ammon were neighbors to the Israelites, distant cousins of sorts. The story is not meant to be taken as a literal history of these people, but as invective against these peoples, describing them as descendants of incest. On its face, the text is a slur, a hyperbolic parable to explain that the Ammonites and Moabites were literally bad from the seed.
So again, if you read later in Torah text, the Ammonites and the Moabites attack Israel, and they've been sort of enemies of Israel. And so this is sort of explaining why they're such rotten people. They are literally bastards, and use English text. They are literally children of incest, less.
Well, is this because the father was willing to throw these 2 virgin daughters out to the men in the street and not give a darn about them?
No, it's because according to the story, these 2 nations, the Ammonites and the Moabites, are children of incest. They are children of Lot and his daughters.
No, but you're saying there's so much infighting or hatred. Couldn't it be that if the mothers of these nations were thrown out to be raped and violated by men, that they would hate the one who did it, and that was Lot, who represented, I guess, the Jews.
That's an interesting take, and we'll keep that in mind. But basically, what we find ourselves in, the authors of the Bible are finding themselves in a world where there's a nation, Israel, and Israel has other nations surrounding it. We know there's Egyptians, there's Canaanites, there's Jebusites, there's a bunch of other ites, there's Philistines, and then there's Moabites and Ammonites. So here's a story very early in Genesis, which explains the origin of the Ammonites and the Moabites. So the story's conclusion makes this clear, and let's see that now where they're quoting actually some of the text that we read. So let's continue in the English.
Should I do the older one bore or the
Yes.
stories?
The older one bore, yeah.
The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. And the younger also bore a son, and she called him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today.
And so actually, just from a linguistic point of view, the writer here is saying the Moabites of today. So presumably this was written at a time when everybody the readers would understand that there are a lot of Moabites around.
The story is panning on the names Moab is being interpreted as if it means from dad. and the other as if it derives from the word which means nation or even father's family. In Arabic, means paternal uncle.
Okay.
The hidden legacy of the sisters. Often unnoticed is how this ending shows the important role of the two women in the story. For one, they, not Lot, name the boys. In that sense, they are parallel to Eve, Leah, Rachel, Hannah, and Bathsheba, as well as to the unnamed wife of Judah, the unnamed wife of Manoah, and the unnamed wife of Pinchas, daughter-in-law of Eli, who all name their children.
So this is commenting typically the men name children. And there are a few counterexamples, actually a lot. So even though we don't know the names of these women, Lot's daughters, we do know that they are the ones who name their children.
Second, they inherit land. In a manner of speaking, in Deuteronomy 2, Moses warns the Israelites not to attack the lands of Ar, Moab, and Ammon, respectively, because
Yeah.
Lacha,
Well, ki livnei Lot natati ha Yerisha,
yeah, okay.
because I have given it to Bnei Lot as an inheritance.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, sorry.
so that there's a quote from Deuteronomy where God is explicitly saying that land belongs to the children of Lot.
Grammatically, B'nai is an inclusive form that can refer to all male or mixed gender groupings. Although it is usually parsed as masculine plural, I teach it as inclusive plural.
So she would translate it as the children of Lot. It could literally mean the sons of Lot. Uh, okay.
Whatever the author of Deuteronomy 2 meant by this phrase, when we read it together with the story of the two unnamed sisters, a gender expansive translation would seem appropriate, namely the daughters of Lot and their descendants. This identifies all of the reference, reminding the reader of their troubling relationships to each other. To put it another way, Lot has no descendants who are not Benot Lot, descendants, children, sons of the daughters of Lot.
Yeah, it's a simple point. All of Lot's descendants come through his daughters. His these two daughters. There were other daughters living with him in Sodom, but presumably they, along with the rest of the Sodomites, were killed.
Thus, the sisters of the heart of the story deemed Lot's also receive an inheritance of sorts. As the mothers of Ammon and Moab, they are each given a land of their own by Hashem. Here again, these unnamed sisters find themselves in the company of important women in the Bible, such as the five daughters of Zelophehad, Mala, Mika, Tirzah, Hagla, and Noah, who insist on their rights to inherit land from their deceased father, and Asha, who asks her father, Caleb, for a great grant of water sources to be added to the land given her husband.
So again, the author is pointing out that it's not very common that women are granted inheritance of land. And in this case, it clearly happens, and there are a few other cases as well.
The reference to B'nai Lot in Deuteronomy is the daughter's last biblical footprints. From here, we can look back, as did their infamous mother, to the sisters' first textual footprints in Genesis 14, to the account, or rather non-account, of their mother.
Okay, so we're going to address the question of who was Lot's wife?
The name of the woman with whom Lot shares a portion of his life does not appear in the text. We do not know if Lot is married to her when he is taken captive by the four kings in Genesis 14. But if so, then she and her daughters, if they were already born, may be included among Lot's goods which are taken.
So quoting from Genesis 14.
They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, and his possessions and departed, for he had settled in Sodom. So
She or they.
They may also be imagined as having been among the women captured and later freed by Abraham. He brought back all of the possessions. He also brought back his kinsmen, Lot and his possessions, and the women and the rest of the people. In the story of the destruction of Sodom, her existence is implied before she is introduced, since we hear about Lot's daughters.
Yeah, I mean, she's just pointing out that we don't hear a lot about Lot's wife, other than she's going to be turned into a pillar of salt. And there are lots of Abraham stories, which I must admit I don't dwell on, about his battle with other kings and things. Um, and Lot appears in those stories.
Lot's daughters, after bringing home two guests, they happen to be the divine messengers, but Lot does not know this at first. The people of Sodom surround the house and demand that Lot send out the guests to be raped. Lot responds, he said, I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please, but do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof.
And you wonder why we don't read these stories in the Golden Book of Bible stories to our preschool kids.
This scene introduces the sisters, not their mother. Yet clearly, if Lot has daughters, they have a mother. We are not told what she thinks of his attempt to distract the men of the town by offering their daughters as sexual appeasement.
They had to have a mother at some point. It doesn't mean they have to. They have to still have a mother. She could have died at some point prior to this.
Yeah, but we know he has a wife because she leaves with them and she looks back. And I don't recall specifically whether, it's clear that this woman, who is not named, is the daughter's mother, but clearly she existed at some point. Yes, I agree with you.
The story refers to the daughters again after the guests, who are gradually revealed to be more than human, pull Lot back in the house and strike to the Sodomites with blindness.
Okay,
Then,
and it's the guests that are more than human, not the daughters. I was a little puzzled. You read it?
then the men said to Lot, whom else have you here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place.
Wow.
The unusual specifying of daughters here alerts the hearer, to a rare narrative in which women will figure prominently. The mention of sons-in-law identifies the daughters as betrothed, essentially legally married, but not co-resident.
Yeah. So the word for sons-in-law are chatan, and at a wedding, the word for bridegroom is a chatan. So technically, a chatan is someone who is betrothed, which is legally bound to the kala, to the bride, but they're not yet married and not yet co-resident or cohabiting. So I'm confused here a little bit because I always assumed that he had other daughters who were married, and that's what was meant by these sons-in-laws. And I don't know if the I mean, the word for husband is Baal. So I guess, I mean, in theory, the text could have said his daughters and their, Baalim, their husbands. There is a Hebrew word for husband, which really is sort of like a master. Sorry, ladies. But they don't use that word. They use the word chatan. So that's the reference there.
Why does it include sons, daughters, and son-in-laws, but not daughters-in-law? Is it simply that none of his sons are married, or
Well, he's actually. I mean, easy answer is I don't know. But I'm not sure that the men know either. He says, "Who else do you have here?" Um, chatan, which are sons-in-laws, venecha, your daughters, venotecha. No, that would be sons. But bene Benecha would be son, Benotecha, V'kol asher lacha ba'ir, and anyone else who was in the city. So on the surface, I read this text as saying the angels, these visitors, don't know who Lot has in his household, and the fact that he says sons-in-law, sons and daughters, is just he's asking about them, but he doesn't specifically say daughters-in-law, and I'm not even sure what the Hebrew word would be for daughters-in-law. So I don't really know the answer to your question.
But maybe it's not important that any of them really have names, because you don't have to believe in the story for it to have importance. You know,
Right.
you're
Yeah,
getting a tale, you're getting a tale here of, morality and questioning
right.
of, the reason nobody has names is you could be that person. What are you willing to do in these kind of desperate situations?
Yeah, I think another feminist reading is these people aren't really important enough to be named, because being named in the Bible is a designation of importance, and it's actually interesting to see who is named. So, for example, the ones I always think about is are the midwives that saved Moses. You know the story. Pharaoh orders all the babies to be thrown into the sea, and these midwives save the Hebrew children. And they're named Shifra and Pua, so we know their names. So they are actually interesting. They're important enough to be named. Whereas many others in the text aren't named, including the daughters here. And it's an interesting question about why they're not named. But I like that interpretation, is that they're really, placeholders that you can insert your own identity into. I like that. Okay, so I think we're right here after Lot fails.
Yeah. After Lot fails to convince these sons-in-law to join him in escaping Sodom, they think he sounds ridiculous. The angels warn Lot to leave the city. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Here, Lot's wife appears explicitly for the first time. Lot's dawdling. When Lot dawdles, the divine messengers are forced to bring the family out themselves. Two messengers, 4 hands, 4 persons.
And here's the translation.
He delayed, so the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters in Hashem's compassion for him, and brought him out and left him outside the city.
Yeah, so 2 angels, they have 4 hands, and 4 people, Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters, are brought out of the city.
The text notes that Hashem has compassion not for them, but for him, making it clear that while the divine messengers are saving his family, they were only really sent to save Lot. The women are of ancillary importance. Next follows the famous command to run away without looking back, delivered by the remaining divine messenger. The Hebrew verbs and pronouns are all in the masculine singular, and they are addressed to Lot. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away."
So just in case you don't follow the grammatical point, in English, if I say flee to the hills, I can be talking to a man, a woman, a group of men, a group of women, or a mixed gender group. In Hebrew, we actually know the distinction, and these are all in masculine singular, as she notes below. So, Lot, flee for your life, do not look behind you, and so on.
Here Lot dithers again. He says he's afraid and he can't flee to the hills. Lot speaks of his escape in the first person singular. Like the messenger, he is thinking only of himself now. "But as for me, I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place, and let my life be saved." Why Lot believes he cannot make it to the hills in time is unclear, But his panic forces the divine messenger to accede to the request. At this time, we have heard not a mumbling word from Lot's womenfolk. While in context, this could be chalked up to the narrator's demonstrated lack of interest in the female characters, except when it directly affects Lot's story. In my womanist reading, I suggest that they did not object because, for reasons that will become clear, they preferred to flee to an inhabited city rather than to the isolated hills. The wife turns into
Hold on 1 second. Jim.
The angel told Lot only, don't look back. So Lot's wife was not given those instructions.
Yeah, so let's see what she says when in the next paragraph.
Okay.
It's a very good question. It occurred to me also. Les.
What makes Lot so important? It seems like all he cares about is himself. He doesn't care about his daughters who haven't been married, just throw them out to the wolves. What makes him so important, and why is he so, I guess, favored by God that he's trying to save him, etc.?
Well, presumably he's righteous, although he makes you wonder the way he was acting.
If this is righteous.
Yeah, right. And also he's going to be the father of the Ammonites and the Moabites. So we need him for that story. But yeah, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. So let's read about Mrs. Lot. And in Hebrew it's Lot, and English Lot. So I kind of use both. So let's read when the wife turns into a pillar of salt.
At sunrise, Lot and his unmentioned wife and daughters make it to Zoar, and Hashem rains fire and brimstone on Sodom and the other cities of the valley, destroying them totally. While this takes place, Lot's wife looks back. Lot's wife looked behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. On one level, the story seeks to explain peculiar and possibly anthropomorphic crystal salt formations near the Dead Sea.
Okay, so I've never seen the word gynopromorphic, and it turns out to be an image of a woman. Anthropomorphic is something that looks like presumably a male or human. Gynopromorphic would be specifically female, and I'll let you decide whether that is gynomorphism. I guess I don't know. I mean,
Hence gynecology.
Yeah, it's related to the word, obviously, for gynecology. So I'm not going to ask for a vote on whether this is gynopromorphic because it's too close to Rorschach, and I don't want Cheryl to be able to interpret what we're thinking. Okay, let's see. But that's a new word, gynopromorphic. I don't know how often that will come up in conversation, but good luck with that. Okay.
And from within the narrative, the crystallization of Lot's women is a simple punishment. For a disobedience trope, this especially harsh treatment contrasts with the messenger of God's acquiescence to Lot, when he too disobeys the command to run to the hills. In Lot's case, the divine plan is altered to accommodate his disobedience, but Lot's wife is not extended the same compassion.
Yeah, and she doesn't comment on the point which you raised, that the command was given, it was up here, do not look behind you, al tavit. Apparently it's masculine singular, so the command was given to Lot, but it's also presumably understood to be a command given to the women, just as it's Adam who is told not to eat of the fruit of not to eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, but presumably the woman shouldn't eat from it either. And then I think this phrase is important. It's simple punishment for disobedience trope. So the Bible is filled with that. You disobey God, and you get zest in some way. Except, as this author is pointing out, Lot was told to flee to the hills, but he said, I'd rather go to this little town, and he wasn't punished for that. Okay.
Her transformation into a pillar connects her story with a biblical tradition of using pillars to memorialize events. Eshet Lot, Lot's wife, woman, stands as a memorial marker for the dead of Sodom and Gomorrah. Her body has literally become the stuff of tears, tears that Hashem does not shed in the story for the extinguished lives of the infants, children, women, men, livestock, and plants of Sodom and Gomorrah, but that perhaps later readers will.
And obviously the references to salt and salty tears.
In Just a Sister Away, the Reverend and Hebrew Bible scholar Renita Weems provides what is for me the next poignant exploration of Eshet Lot's motives for looking back. For the question is not why did she look, but how could she not? On one level, the scene of her death is shocking and tragic. As the family is presumably together at this point, her daughters will have seen her to die, as will Lot, though they say nary a word about it in the text as they go on without her.
Yeah, on one level, I think it's reasonable if you have this fire and brimstone raining down on the cities, and presumably all their friends and possibly family members are being killed. So, this author asks a question: how could she not look back?
Well, when Nadav and Abihu get, zapped for playing with the wrong fire pan, their father doesn't seem to have too much trouble.
Yeah, he seems to get over it pretty well. And that's actually, there's at least a masculine simple punishment for disobedience. They offered strange fire, whatever that means, to God, and a bolt of fire comes and burns them up. So there's a lot of that going on. Okay, let's do a little more, and then we'll leave it for next week. Moving to the cave.
At this point in the story, Lot makes another, on the surface, inexplicable decision. Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his two daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his two daughters lived in a cave. By verse 30, Lot has moved his daughters to the hills outside of the city. Now he is afraid. We do not know why these women did not marry in Zoar. Why would Lot beg the divine messenger to let him escape to Zoar and then leave to go to the mountains? We get a hint as to what he is ostensibly thinking in the next part of the story. And the older one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of the world, of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life throughout our father.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good translation. It's nishkava, literally to lie imo with him, as opposed to know him. I mean, just different euphemisms for sex.
According to this, the sisters are under the impression that they and their father are the only living human beings left on earth. Why would they think this? Apparently, Lot told them that even Zoar, when they had escaped, where they had escaped to, was going to be or had been destroyed. But what about the rest of the earth? Are we to imagine that they extrapolated from the traumatic destruction of Sodom that all the world was destroyed except their righteous father? Or perhaps Lot said, this is to them as well. But
Or
why?
perhaps Lot said this to them as well. But why? So it's a very interesting point. They were in Zohar, and presumably there were men around, and now they're saying there's nobody else left on earth. So who told them this? I often use a kind of a similar question in talking about the Garden of Eden, where Eve says, or Chava says to the serpent, God told us, don't eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and don't even touch it. And so the question comes, who told her that? Because God only tells God only tells Adam, don't eat the fruit. He doesn't say anything about not touching it. But when Eve is talking with the serpent, she says, God has told us not even to touch it. So who told him that? Who told her that? Presumably Adam. Why? he was sort of building a fence around the Torah. Don't eat it, don't touch it, don't look at it, don't smell it. You know, he had his own purposes to try and keep her away from this fruit. So now she's asking the question, the author, why did Lot tell this to his daughters? Okay, let's just get to the rape, and then we'll pick up after that next week.
The story continues with the daughters essentially raping their father by getting him blackout drunk so they could ensure the future of humanity. That night, they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day, the older one said to the younger, "See, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night, also, they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus, the two daughters of Lot came to be with the child by their father. Why do the daughters feel the need to get Lot drunk, if this is a noble cause? And why is Lot's response to what they all believed was the end of the human race to get drunk night after night? The
Hearer
must also imagine Lot is not so drunk as to impede his ability to have sex, but at the same time so intoxicated that he does not notice his own daughters having sex with him. The rabbis expressed suspicion about this point, explaining that the puncta extraordinaria over the word "when she got up" implies that the Masoretes believe that he really did know. Indeed, Genesis Rabbah quotes a sage named Rabbi Elijah Ani, who claims that really the sex was Lot's idea. At first, we would not know whether Lot lusted for his daughters or his daughters lusted for him. But on the basis of what is written, he who separates himself seeks desire. It is clear that Lot lusted after his daughters, and his daughters did not lust after him.
Okay, well, one more sentence and then we'll pause.
Okay, in this reading, Lot's running away with his daughters to a cave instead of staying in Zoar is evidence that he is attracted to them and wants to get them alone.
In case you want to track down this dot, which she says is in verse 53, which is a great reference, except there is no verse 53, but there is a verse 33, and here is the dot. I just want to point out I do my homework. So that's the dot in verse 33. So I'm going to leave you at this point because the next part, which you may want to read ahead, is her sort of feminist, womanist reading of the story, where it's really about Lot being sexually attracted to his daughters. And the story is intended to be covering up that idea. I am not for a minute saying that is the meaning of the story, but I think it's a really good example of modern midrash, of taking a look at a story and dissecting it and looking deeply into it from a modern point of view. You know, I hope you enjoy it, appreciate it from that perspective. And we will continue this discussion next time.
One last question.
Sure.
Okay. Angels don't need to eat. They don't have human digestive systems.
Presumably.
So would it have even been possible for the sodomites to have sodomized them?
Oh, you're asking, do they have an anus? I don't know what the plural of anus is. Is that what you're really asking?
Yes.
There is a question that is too deep for your rabbi. But I do think you should write a letter to your Chabad rabbi asking the question, do angels have assholes? I'm actually sorry I didn't pause the recording. I posed. Is that what you're asking, Stephen? Do angels have assholes?
Or are they?
How long has that been bothering you, Stephen? Yeah, so but actually to answer in a more substantive note, The Hebrew word for angel is the same as the Hebrew word for messenger. And actually, in the story of the birth of Samson, well, actually, not even going back there. In the story, when these same angels visit Abraham, he prepares an extensive meal for them. And the rabbis in the midrash ask, how is it they could eat this meal? And so they raise the same question without having to look quite so deeply into the discussion, shall we say? Leslie, Les.
This is a question way off the top, but I want to ask Cheryl, do you know much about these drones? We're seeing it all over the news, and you're in New Jersey. Are you seeing any of these drones or hearing anything about them from neighbors?
No, I haven't heard anything about them. I mean, I've heard about it on the news,
Right.
but I haven't seen them where I live in Bergen County. There have been reports in other counties of New Jersey of drones.
So, Les, are you asking, might they be angels? Is that the reason for your raising?
No, I heard, and I mean, talking about that
If they are angels, we might be able to trap one and resolve
Check.
Stephen's question.
See if you could do a rectal arm. Is that what you're going to say? No, but I heard there's a 47-foot Coast Guard cutter that was out there, and there was 12 drones the size of cars that were following
Yeah,
them.
actually, since we're discussing, are there any more questions about the?
That's why I said it was
Bible? It's okay. I'm just going to stop recording.
Oh, I thought you were stopped already.
No. Yeah.